They told me you were experienced in harsh waters.
James said as he pointed out the pearls of sweat that had formed on my forehead. No, no, I do. I replied moments before hurling the remnants of a less than appetizing lunch off the side of our ship.
It's just that you look a bit green around the gills.
We just met a few hours ago, and I had been airlifted to the USS Orion, a sea lift handling Abyssal transport capsules for a classified project conducted by the United States Navy. I guess they failed to mention that I'm much better underwater, in submarines, I shot back. Considering the circumstances, his casual demeanor left an uncomfortable atmosphere among the workers. They all knew what my visit entailed, but just like myself, they were scant with information. All I knew was that there might be a contagious infection at the bottom of the ocean, and my job was to either disprove it or confine the entire crew aboard the station. As soon as we were positioned securely atop the Tonga Trench, we were rushed into the transport capsule, a minuscule vertical submarine designed simply to take us to the base of the ocean floor. 20,000 feet below us. Talos. I entered the sub feeling excited, while also dreading the return to the deep blue. It had been 10 years since serving as a hospital corpsman, one of the few actually stationed aboard a submarine. Over the years, I had clearly lost my natural sense I once had for the ocean. Yet, I longed desperately for it.
Whenever you're ready, Doc.
One of the crew members said, impatiently waiting to drop us into the abyss. I raised my thumb. Ready as I'll ever be. Go ahead. "10 feet, the twilight zone. The impact of the ocean lightly shook the capsule. As we submerged, my nausea quickly diminished, and a sense of peace washed over my mind. I was back. Outside a window, a few curious fish accompanied our journey downwards. Various sea life attracted by the cargo ship following us to see us off. James piloted the miniature sub, having done this trip 1,000 times before. It wasn't anything new to him. Myself, I'd never been below 2,000 feet, and never had I been able to look through a window and admire the mostly unexplored blue world. As we sank deeper towards the abyss, the last stray rays of sunshine vanished. We had left the realm of sunshine and mankind, all in favor for the domain of darkness.
First time in the abyss, right?
James asked after a long bout of silence. Yeah, served aboard a submarine for a few years, but they never go very deep. This is something else. He smiled at me.
Well, you're in for a treat then. We're going all the way down. Talos sits right at the edge of the trench. Nothing quite like it.
Any sea life once curious about our sub had long since retreated towards the brighter areas. The rapidly increasing pressure had proven too hostile to most. But some resilient little creatures had found a way to thrive in places once thought to be lifeless. The miracles of the ocean. Within an hour we had reached a depth of 10,000 feet. Beyond the 15-inch glass plane separating us from certain death lied nothing but everlasting darkness. For all we knew, the two of us could have been all that existed in that void, if not for the sound of the outer hull settling under the pressure, a constant reminder about the vastness of the ocean. To distract myself from the unsettling creaking sound, I asked James about the only thing that I can think about. Why don't you tell me more about what happened down there? James had acted casual that far, but my question quickly changed his nonchalant expression to a frown.
They briefed you on the surface, didn't they?
Of course, but...
Then I'll have to do.
He said firmly. 13,100 feet. The Abyssal Zone. The world outside hypnotized me, staring so far into nothing, knowing that there could be a full world only a few feet before you was bizarre. I'd never experienced true darkness until that day. And to think, A good portion of Earth's life had existed within it for millions of years. Terrified me. When I served aboard the USS Cetacea, my captain explained why they don't put windows on submarines. He told stories about shipmates going crazy after years at sea. The isolation, or the distance from the mainland, never bothered any of them. He firmly believed that staring into the ocean and pondering its secrets was what drove men from their sanity. And to combat this, they never put windows on their vessels. I thought it was clearly a tale he made up. Seeing what truly lies beyond the surface brought back these memories. Maybe he was right after all. My sinister thoughts were interrupted by a dim light appearing in the distance. A red dot dancing blissfully up and down, getting closer to our little sub. It was a jellyfish.
Would you look at that?
James said as he pointed at the little creature. So fragile, yet defying the deep sea pressure. Another light joined in, then a few more. And before long, a symphony of pulsating crimson lights formed all around our capsule, welcoming us with its warmth of 1,000 stars, making up their own little galaxy, thousands of feet below the surface. It was the most magnificent thing I'd ever seen. A bloom of jellyfish happily existing in such hostile conditions, I couldn't help but feel impressed.
They're called Atolla jellyfish. They don't usually venture this far down, but there's something about this place that seems to attract them. I usually see a few on my journeys down here, but never anything like this.
I just nodded in response, too mesmerized by the sight to notice what he had said. But as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished, once more leaving us in absolute darkness.
Listen, Doc. Sorry about the outburst earlier.
I turned towards him, turning my back to the darkness for the first time. It made me feel vulnerable.
You gotta understand, this ain't something we usually deal with. And Mike, well, I've known him most of my life.
I know how much this sucks. Believe me. I'm just trying to get as much info as possible for all our sakes.
Yeah, well, there's nothing I can tell you anyway. The airlock has been on lockdown for the past 2 days, and we're under strict orders not to open it until you deem it safe to do so.
I didn't ask any further questions. I dealt with contagions ever since leaving the Navy, and 90% of the time, they were simple over-exaggerations. 19,700 feet, the ocean basin. For the first time since we left the ship, the radio came to life, emitting a static sound that slowly took the shape of a man's voice.
James, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Captain. I got our man from the CDC with me as well. We're just about ready to dock.
Great. The crew is getting impatient. The radio is docked at Section A.
Welcome to the Abyssal Zone. The radio has been acting strange lately. Imagine giving us a state-of-the-art station, but comms from the last millennium.
Through the window we could see a massive dome lit up by hundreds of lights. 3 paths stretched from its center, each lit up by different colors marking sectors A, B, and C. There was something else lit up by the station's light. At first, just obscured figures leaving shadows in the sand. But as we got closer, I realized they were fish. Hundreds, if not thousands, of dead sea creatures littering the ocean's bed. Their corpses mangled from the intense pressure. Christ, what the hell is up with the fish?
Same as the Atolla. Something attracts them down here. And they swim till their bodies break under the pressure. Then they sink.
What could possibly do that?
There are a few theories, but from what we can tell, it's a sound that we periodically hear from the trench.
The docking process itself took quite some time. The outer hull had changed ever so slightly due to the high pressure, just enough so that fitting into the station proved a challenge. As the doors finally opened, I stumbled outside of the capsule, greeted by 3 of the crew members aboard.
You're the doctor, right?
The oldest of them asked. That's correct, as he reached out his hand to introduce himself.
The name's Robert Lewis. I'm the captain assigned to Talos. Thank you for coming this far. I know it's not the most pleasant journey.
He seemed polite enough, though clearly sleep-deprived, with bloodshot eyes and greasy hair.
This is Jennifer Burke, one of our biologists. And that's Henry Gale, our technician.
They both shook my hand, neither making eye contact as they did.
Hey, Cap, where's Abby?
Still at Section B. She's not doing too well, as I'm sure you can understand.
James nodded.
Let's talk.
Robert said as he gestured for me to follow. The hallways were narrow, dimly lit up with lights that flickered and a constant creaking emitting from the walls. It looked disproportionate considering how large it had all seemed from the outside. And as a rather tall guy, I had to crouch down to keep my head from knocking into the ceiling.
I'm sorry about the grim mood. It's the first time we're dealing with something like this. I'm assuming they told you about the situation on the surface?
They did, but I have to admit, I'm a bit fuzzy on the details.
As are we. Mike put himself in lockdown as soon as he returned to the station, and we haven't had clearance to open it yet.
Mike, didn't give you any good reasons?
He never got the chance. He fell over dead the second he hit the button.
Robert led us to the central dome. In contrast to the hallways, it was a pleasant surprise. A large living space filled with furniture and personal effects. Had I not known any better, I could have believed we were still on the surface.
Mike discovered some microorganisms down in the trench. A new type of parasite, he said. He claimed they were able to withstand any amount of pressure, which isn't a surprise down here, but he also explained that they were completely unaffected by rapid changes in environment.
Did he believe it was contagious?
Seeing as he was our microbiologist, I can't really come up with another fathomable conclusion. Needless to say, we destroyed all the samples, but we still don't know why he put himself into lockdown. But that's not the strangest thing.
I waited patiently for him to continue, while he tried to form the words he clearly had trouble believing himself.
We lost him in the trench for 3 entire days. The tracking system failed and the comms went down. We did whatever we could, but it was futile. Even if we had found him, he only had enough oxygen for 10 hours. So, unfortunately, we presumed he had died. Then, out of nowhere, his tracker reappeared on our systems, showing that he was moving back up the Tonga elevator, and though he never responded to any of our attempts at contacting him, he was clearly alive.
How?
It's impossible, yet it happened. Once we let him onto the station, he simply locked it down and fell over dead on the ground.
Before Robert could continue, a technician walked into the office.
When you examine him, be careful not to damage the EPM suit. It's highly—
This is hardly the time, Henry.
Robert commanded, glaring at him.
I'm just saying, this is $1 billion project.
Why don't you go get the equipment for our doctor here?
Robert demanded, getting more agitated by the minute.
Look, Captain, if you would just let me go into the airlock, I could take all the necessary precautions.
Absolutely not. Do you think headquarters would have sent the damn CDC if they thought we could handle it? For Christ's sake, Henry, know your limits.
The technician left and quickly returned with a modified hazmat suit and some surgical supplies. We moved on towards Section B. Unlike the hallways we had traversed before, these were large and well lit up. As we arrived at the airlock, we found Abby standing before the glass doors, staring longingly at Mike's lifeless body.
Abby.
I know. It's time.
She responded as she turned around.
Oh. You're the doctor?
She asked, her eyes red and voice trembling.
You'll figure out what did this to him, won't you? I just don't understand.
Abby, why don't you come with me while they work? You don't need to see this.
As Robert led her back to the central dome, Henry started unpacking the cart of medical supplies, including isolation drapes and a hazmat suit.
All right, I'm going to guide you through this. No need to mess up a perfectly good EPM suit.
What does EPM mean anyways? I asked.
Exoskeletal pressure modulator.
Henry said as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. James and Jennifer helped me seal up the hazmat suit while Henry hung up the isolation drapes. I stepped through while Jennifer entered the code behind me to open the airlock. My ears popped as they sealed the door behind me. Both the drapes and airlock were transparent, meaning they could observe everything I did. In addition to a mounted camera on my shoulder for a closer view, displayed on a monitor on the other side. Just by the control panel, Mike lied, dead, wearing a massive black suit, looking more like a robotic piece of machinery than diver's gear. There were several cables and hooks hanging from the ceiling, and just turning him over was a massive task, as he weighed about a half-ton wearing the suit. His face was pale as a sheet, with streaks of blood pouring from every available orifice. The eyes were red from conjugal bleeding, completely ridding them of any white. "I'm ready," I said.
All right, the first thing you'll need to do is to simply inspect the suit. Look for any breaches in the integrity. It shouldn't be possible, but in the unlikely event that something broke through, a self-healing mesh should have formed. It looks kind of gray.
I looked over every inch of his suit, from top to bottom.
There, his feet!
Sure enough, there was a patch of gray that stood out from the matte black metal covering the rest of him.
Something actually perforated his suit!
I got closer, giving them a better view on the monitor.
Clearly, the puncture wasn't what killed him, though.
He added. I had to agree with that assessment. Any breach that had not sealed off within a nanosecond would have immediately crushed him. But it seemed that the mesh had replaced whatever penetrated the suit at the same time as it was removed.
Next, attach the cables to his shoulder. They're color-coded, so it should be easy enough.
I attached the cables as instructed, which caused the suit to light up and start unhinging. The front of the suit opened, revealing Mike's completely mangled body.
What the hell?
That's not pressure damage.
Mike's ribs had broken outwards, though they had not torn apart his flesh. His chest seemed to have expanded almost twice its normal size. I continued to remove his helmet, pulling it off his head. I looked into his eyes for a brief moment, baffled as to see what could have caused his internal organs to essentially explode. For the briefest moments, it seemed like his eyes moved to meet my gaze. Did you just see that? No one said a word. We all just stared at Mike, waiting for something to happen. His eyes moved again, darting in random directions as he started gargling, violently contracting his chest.
Oh God! He's still alive?
Jennifer asked. He opened his mouth, letting thousands of massive worms pour out onto the floor. They immediately crawled in every direction, up the walls, onto the ceiling, desperately searching for a way out. Mike continued to spew out more slimy worms. His mouth tore open in the process, leaving his jaw completely unhinged before falling off. Once all the worms seemed to have exited his corpse, his chest tore open, revealing even larger worms. It quickly became apparent that all his organs had been consumed, replaced with the disgusting creatures. Some of them started to cling onto my suit, and I swatted them away in panic, and none of the others knew what to do. They could only stare at me flailing around. As the worms touched each other, their flesh temporarily fused, forming longer versions of themselves, growing in size and then breaking off again. They wrapped around my arms and legs. I begged for someone to help me, but what could they do?
Hang in there!
Henry yelled as he fumbled with the panel on the airlock. Within seconds, a few small taps emerged from the ceiling, spewing what I could only assume was liquid nitrogen. Whatever it was, the worms froze in place, freezing to the point where I could easily break them into tiny pieces. It only took a moment, but all the worms had been killed off, and though my suit had partially protected me from the cold, I collapsed, exhausted and shivering onto the ground. Get me the fuck out of here! I demanded, knowing full well they couldn't do that until I had dealt with the infestation. Robert had just returned in time to see what the commotion was about, and upon seeing what remained of Mike laying torn to pieces on the ground, he stopped in his tracks. After a minute of catching my breath, I got some sense back. With some morbid sense of humor and functioning on autopilot, I turned towards Henry. Sorry, But the suit isn't going to be salvaged. We're ejecting the whole fucking airlock as soon as I get out of here. Henry turned to Robert, pleading for him to make me reconsider, despite what we had all just witnessed. But Robert took my side. After removing the recording unit from the EPM suit, I packed the entire thing into an easily ejectable container, while making sure that no worms remained on my suit. All I took was a small sample of a frozen worm, packed into a vacuum container. I exited the airlock and handed the sample over to Jennifer. She had prepared the previous parasites brought back by Mike, and I told her to get everything ready so that I could determine what we were dealing with. Robert started the procedure of ejecting the airlock's content, including what remained of Mike and the EPM suit. Henry, pouting the whole time. James hadn't moved an inch since the event. He turned sickly pale, as if he just realized the severity of the situation.
We have to tell him, Captain.
He said quietly after a few minutes. Tell me what? I asked while getting out of the hazmat suit. Robert took a deep breath, mulling over his options.
You're right.
Tell me what? I repeated.
The real reason we're stationed down here.
Death can be a beautiful thing. Beyond all the stigma associated around the event, it's the beginning of a world that starts directly from the end of another. When a whale dies in extreme depths, they sink towards the ocean floor, where entire ecosystems arise from their decomposing body. This is called a whale fall. Mike's EPM suit had left behind 3 days worth of footage. Henry was put on the task of preparing it for viewing. While we couldn't save him, nor the suit, we could at least figure out how Mike died. As we waited, the captain decided it was time for me to learn the truth about their mission, and why no one else on the surface had ever heard of the scientific wonders that was Talos.
You saw all the dead sea creatures littering the ocean floor on the station?
I recalled the hundreds of mangled bodies of fish, not the most welcoming sight to the abyss. James told me something had compelled them to dive down here. Some sort of sound? Robert nodded as he pulled up a computer. After a moment of fumbling, he clicked on a sound file.
About 5 years ago, we recorded this coming up from the depths of the Tonga Trench.
It was oddly synthetic sounding, like a whale mating call had been pitched down and jumbled around. And in the midst of it all, there was something that sounded like a whisper.
They recorded something similar around the Mariana Trench and called it the biotwang.
The sound played on loop as we talked, oddly eerie for something so innocent.
We first thought it came from a whale, just a bit distorted after traveling vast distances, or instrumental interference. But then we saw how it affected the wildlife in the region. Blooms of jellyfish appearing out of nowhere, and fish defying all instincts to dive towards crushing pressure.
What made that sound then? Robert pulled some pictures on the screen. Creatures similar to roundworms, but pitch black. They looked nothing like what I had just witnessed in the airlock, however.
From what we can tell, there's a thus far completely undiscovered ecosystem somewhere down the trench, isolated for millions of years, unaffected by mass extinction events. They have evolved quite differently from life we see on the surface. It's like millions of single-celled organisms working together to form more complex creatures, but unlike ourselves, the cells can detach and rejoin at will. We've named it the syncytium.
That's what killed Mike?
They could be part of it, but what we just saw in the airlock is far larger than the microorganisms we gathered here.
Before we could continue, James interrupted, letting us know that the footage was ready to be viewed.
If they ever decide to declassify the existence of the station, they'll never mention the creatures, nor the sound that alerted us to their presence. I'm sure one day they'll hail this all as a supreme technological advancement. But truth be told, the reason why the Navy put billions and billions of dollars into this project, so that humanity could traverse the ocean floor, is simply because they want to find whatever is making that sound and make a way of using it.
Cap, they're waiting for us.
We gathered in the central area. Abby sat in the back, some distance away from everyone else. She seemed worse for wear than before, frail, as if she had lost weight in the past couple hours since meeting her. Henry controlled the footage, ready to speed through to the important bits, as the descent itself was pretty slow. 20,000 feet, a Handel zone. Everything we saw would be from Mike's point of view. The footage started at the airlock, Abby standing before him with a concerned expression on her face.
Don't worry. I'll be back before you know it. It's not like it's my first time in the depths. It's not like they'd waste $1 billion on me dying anyway.
She didn't seem consoled by his words.
This time is different. We haven't tested the suit beyond 30,000 feet yet.
No, but we've tested pressure. The suit should be able to go much further before breaking.
Henry forwarded the footage. Mike stood directly at the edge of the Tonga Trench. To his left, a platform extended even further down to the Handel zone. An elevator sat at the platform's center. A short distance down the trench, he saw endlessly long tendrils gently swaying with the current. They belonged to a body of a malformed creature, looking like it couldn't possibly control its long appendages. Yet, it seemed unfazed by the depths.
Guys, are you seeing this?
As he pointed at the bizarre being.
It's a Magnapina squid!
He almost jogged along the edge to get a better view, the suit audibly exhausted by the effort.
Don't put too much strain on the suit.
Henry interjected over the radio.
It'll be fine. What else did they pay for?
As he got closer to the squid, another popped up from behind it with even longer appendages.
Damn! I never thought I'd see one up so close.
Stop messing around and get on the elevator.
Fine, let's not enjoy our jobs then.
He boarded the elevator and strapped himself in. The journey would take him another 15,000 feet into the abyss. It was loud, a sturdy piece of machinery able to withstand the immense pressure of the dreaded Handel zone. Mike himself would control the speed of the descent, only handing over control to Henry should something happen. Not long after the descent started, Mike stalled the elevator.
The suit's making weird noises.
That's normal. It's adjusting to the pressure change. We told you that it would happen the deeper you got.
Yeah, I know, but...
You'll be fine.
27,000 feet. Once more, Mike stopped the elevator, directing his gaze at an edge sticking out from the cliffside. On it lay the corpse of a bowhead whale, almost half a planet away from its natural habitat. The whale had been practically hollowed out, riddled with deep-sea eels and tiny eyeless fish, an entire ecosystem thriving from its death.
How did that whale get here?
It died, like all the other creatures down here.
Yeah, but it's a bowhead. At least I think it is. Don't they live around the Arctic?
Just continue the descent.
35,433 feet. The horizon deep. The elevator reached the bottom of the trench after about an hour, allowing Mike to finally unbuckle himself from his seat. He grabbed a box of beacons to allow the next person to easier navigate the area. After stepping off the platform and getting away from its bright lights, it became abundantly clear that the bottom of the ocean was far from empty. Millions of fungal-like plants covering the floor and transparent fat shrimps swimming between, apparently feeding off of them. On the cliff wall itself, thousands of bioluminescent plants extended. Just a stalk with a blue bulb bending in the direction of Mike's movement. It was hauntingly beautiful, looking as alien as anything from another planet. He continued along the cliffside, putting down a beacon every 100 feet or so.
I half expected this place to be horrible. You know, being named after the god of the underworld and all.
No one responded to his comment.
Guys, you can still hear me, right?
Yes, Mike, we can hear you. We're here to work, not make stupid quips.
Has anyone ever told you how much better life can be if you at least try to enjoy it? Henry, stop being such a killjoy. We're making history down here.
Henry didn't respond.
How about you hand Abby the radio? Hell, I'd rather listen to the captain ramble about protocol going on and on.
Mike stopped dead in his tracks. Reaching the end of the cliff, before him was a steep fall leading down to an endless chasm of darkness.
Henry, are you sure the elevator took me all the way down the trench?
Yes, you're 35,000 feet.
Well, it's just that I'm standing at the edge of the cliff, and this is clearly not the bottom of the ocean.
That's impossible. We surveyed the entire area with sonar.
Well, I'm telling you...
The ground beneath Mike crumbled to pieces. He slid off the edge of the cliff and dove further into the deep. The darkness now surrounding him was absolute. Nothing could possibly help him orient himself as he fell. To fall in the ocean was a much slower process, giving him time to think of what kind of fate awaited him as he sunk to depths never before known by mankind. He called out for his crew members while desperately clawing at the cliff, but even with the suit, he was unable to slow his descent. As he got deeper, the suit started emitting loud beeps, alarms to alert to rapid pressure changes exceeding 16,000 psi. But before he could even react, he hit the ground hard. Mike fell silent, passed out from the impact. The void. Minutes after landing at unknown depths, Mike awoke to the sound of his suit beeping. The suit had held its ground and was starting to adjust to the new pressure. The manometer has broken, and with his tracking device malfunctioning, we could only try to guess how far he'd fallen. Mike grunted as he got to his feet, taking some time to figure out what had happened.
Henry, are you there? Captain? Anyone?
Apart from a few malfunctioning instruments, most of the suit seemed intact. Yet no contact could be made with the base. Everything past that point would be after the comms went down, and we all patiently awaited to learn of Mike's fate. Despite having fallen far beyond what we believed to be the ocean floor, he had just landed on another plateau, with an endless distance still progressing downwards. The abyss was ever present, haunting us with its emptiness.
Please, respond.
He activated the beacon still attached to him and checked his surroundings. He had landed directly in front of a cave leading inside the cliff wall. While protocol strictly dictated to wait for rescue in these situations, we could hear gargled sound emitting from the cave. Whatever it was, it compelled Mike to decide to check out the cave. The walls were perfectly smooth, an impossible formation of rocks reflecting the bright light shining from the EPM suit, lighting up the cave as far as it stretched. Mike stared at the shiny walls for a moment, adjusting the light. They had seemed smooth at an angle, but when the light was pointed directly onto them, it uncovered bizarre patterns, like symbols not corresponding with any known language. While he studied the symbols, a loud sound shook throughout the cave, almost sweeping Mike off his feet. It sounded similar to the biotwang, but with slight differences. the rhythm was changed. It seemed to put Mike further into a trance as he diligently followed the source, ignoring any chance of rescue the further in he went. The cave led to a much larger cavern, extending beyond the reach of any light source he had available. Unlike the tunnel, these walls weren't smooth, but were covered in millions of tiny holes, each perfectly round, each identical to the last. Upon closer inspection, the holes weren't empty, but filled with worms just like the ones we'd seen spew out of his body inside the airlock. They wiggled and reached for Mike as he walked through the cavern, pulled towards the sound in the distance, getting louder with each passing step. The deeper he got, the less he seemed distracted by the holes, which were growing in size alongside the worms. Mike's only hypnotic objective was to reach the sound. On top of the worms, spinely long-legged creatures walked across. They looked like shellless spider crabs, dipping their limbs into the worms, merging temporarily while seeming to feed them. For each dip into the holes, their limbs grew shorter, while the worms expanded. Eventually, he reached a corner of the cavern, and with it, the source of the sound. It was a half-consumed whale calf attached to the wall, bound by hundreds of massive worms extending into its torn flesh. Despite being half-eaten and broken beyond any chance of life, it somehow didn't succumb, as if the worms themselves kept it alive. Involuntary life support, repurposed for their own needs. The calf gapped open, its half-eaten jaw so mangled Mike could see straight into its vocal cords, which were also covered in the worms. Tugging and moving them into position, the whale screamed, emitted another jumbled sound that pulled Mike even closer. While Mike was distracted, several worms had emerged from their holes, rapidly swarming around him. Within seconds, they had joined together, wrapping around his legs and climbing up the suit. It temporarily brought Mike back to sanity as he tried to tear off the worms, but they were far faster than him, trapped inside a slow metal box. He stumbled to the ground, allowing more worms and their spine leaves to cover each of his limbs. The creatures merged together, forming a sheet of flesh that soon covered the entirety of his body. Mike fell silent. The camera showed nothing but a flesh-colored mass muffling any audio save for Mike's panicked breath. He screamed as a loud bang almost broke the speakers, the sound of his suit being perforated and the mesh refilling the hole we had found on the sole of his feet. The creatures had gotten inside his suit, digging into his flesh, Mike crying in agony before falling silent. We all stood speechless in front of the monitor, now displaying nothing but a timer, proving the camera was still running. Abby had left with James, following to console her.
That can't be it.
Let me forward it.
We forwarded through almost 3 days of nothing, while the worms incubated inside of Mike, trapped alone in the cavern, no one knowing where he was. The camera started clearing up, the flesh sheet peeling off as the view showed that Mike had returned to the elevator. During the 3 days down in the trench, the worms had occupied, covering it with their fleshy appendages. Mike was controlling it, or whatever remained of him inside the suit. He wandered toward the station, flakes of flesh falling off of him for each step. His crew called out for him over the radio now that they could reach him, but Mike could do nothing but gargle, as the worms had consumed most of his lungs. At the airlock, he stumbled inside, ready to unleash hell within the station. But for a brief moment, Mike managed to halt himself. Perhaps the thought of hurting those he loved was enough for him to temporarily gain control. Just enough time to shut down the airlock, putting himself into lockdown. Mike collapsed to the ground. He had died days ago, but his will remained, even as he turned into nothing more than a vessel for the horrors he now carried within him. The footage ended. We stood in silence for a moment, none of us daring to speak a word about Mike's cause of death. I hardly believed it, despite having almost fallen victim to the same fate.
Henry, call headquarters, tell them we're shutting this project down. Jennifer, destroy the sample from the airlock. It's still sealed, right?
Jennifer nodded before heading toward the lab.
We need to make sure that whatever this is, it stays in the abyss.
I joined Henry as he attempted to call headquarters, the radio returning nothing more than jumbled static. Robert was checking all the security feed, sending out drones to scavenge for the worms at the elevator.
Captain, the comms are completely down. I can't get any signal.
On the security feed, we saw the flesh of the worms had stretched along the ground, covering some of the corpses of fish that littered the ocean floor. It was impossibly large, using the elevator and platform as a scaffold for climbing up toward the station. A loud metallic clang sounded through the station, followed by an alarm. What the hell was that?
Hull breach in Sector C.
Isolate it. Just do it.
Henry frantically tried to navigate the security system, attempting to get an idea as to the extent of the damage.
What's in Sector C? It's the lab. Fucking hell. I hope Jennifer didn't get there yet.
While the station sealed, trapping anyone inside, another loud bang shook us. The alarm sounded again.
Hull breach in Sector E.
Fuck! What now?
Robert stood still in shock, frozen by the decision of saving the station or fleeing.
We have to evacuate.
It has been years, maybe decades, since the last time I've seen anyone. I looked down. My fin was beginning to decay. My time was running out. As I broke the surface, I could see a large boat in the distance. Swimming closer, I saw a family of 3 on the boat. I poked my head just above the water as a little girl, no older than 8, saw me yelling out, "Daddy, Ariel is in the water!" I quickly dipped into the water and followed the boat at a safe distance, every so often poking my head out of the water to reveal myself to the little girl. And without fail, she would keep calling her parents over to see me. The boat finally stopped and I saw some fishing line drop in front of the boat. Good. I got close to the boat, and as I ascend, I held my index finger to my lip, hoping the little girl would understand. When she saw me, she was about to speak, but then she covered her mouth and nodded. She had a pink life vest on, bright blue eyes, and soft blonde hair that bounced around her cute face. "Is your name Ariel?" She bounced up and down. I thought about the Little Mermaid, something I have not seen in a long time, and nodded. "But you're old." Her words stung me. I scowled but quickly masked it with a smile. I waved for her to come into the water, patting the surface, making tiny splish-splash noises, and she stared with uncertainty until I raised my fin to entice her. My fins, though decaying, were still a vibrant purple. Her eyes lit up and she jumped into the water. As she did, I unbuckled the vest from her and tossed it aside. I patted my back and she climbed on, looking nervous, wrapping her little arms around my neck. I glanced over my shoulder, holding my nose, and she mimicked me, taking a deep breath as we dove under. It became darker the further we went. My heart was racing when I pulled her hands away and turned towards her. I opened my mouth, my jaw extending outward, the skin on my cheeks ripping as my jaw became unhinged, my teeth starting to grow, long and pointed like an angler's. My nail became jagged and sharp. I saw the horror on her face as I lunged at her, sinking my teeth into her little neck. Large air bubbles escaped her as she tried to scream, but I consumed her. When I came to, I was looking up at the sky. I could hear seagulls nearby and feel the waves crashing to my legs, but I couldn't move my body. I laid there for a while before I heard someone yell in the distance, and soon enough I heard footsteps approaching me. A man hovered over me.
You okay, little girl? First of all, you're gonna need some context. I'm a park ranger at a national park on a small island nation in the Caribbean. If you never heard of it, I don't blame you. We're a small island about 19 miles long off the coast of Venezuela. The park I work at has at least 8 kilometers of coastline, but you can't swim on most of it. Despite the signs and warnings, that usually doesn't stop people from entering the water. Some end up fine. Some end up injured, and some we just never find. And when we do find them, we just end up with more questions than answers. Unless you're living under a rock, you probably know of the economic crisis in Venezuela, with the crisis getting worse by the day and the tightening of immigration laws on the borders of Colombia, Brazil, and French Guiana. Many end up trying to cross to the neighboring and more prosperous island nations. As you can imagine, not all of them make it. And it's guys like me who ends up finding them. I remember one day in particular, it was my second month working at the park, and I was sent on patrol duty in order to monitor the coast. Now, during patrols, we park our vehicles and check the beaches on foot for plastic, sea turtle nets, and, well, anything out of the ordinary. I was on my way to the first cove, and as I got close to the beach, I see something. A small, yellow boat. I immediately stopped the car and pulled out my binoculars. I didn't know if whoever was using the boats was armed or not, so I observed from a distance. Once I deduced that the craft was abandoned, I made my way to the beach. I informed my superiors, and they later called the police and Coast Guard. Judging by the supplies in the boat, it looked like it was carrying 7 people, one of them possibly piloting the boat. Empty and full water bottles, life vests, soggy bread, things that we would normally find. The cause of this beaching was easy to see. The engine's propeller were completely destroyed, but it didn't look like it had hit a reef. Even if it were the case, there would have been something left to the propellers. But no, the bottom part of the engine had been completely ripped off. Another thing that stuck out to me was the complete lack of footprints. People don't just waltz on the beach and disappear into the night. They leave something behind. It didn't rain the night before and there wasn't any wind, so there should have been some prints left behind. By this time, the Coast Guard and police had arrived, and they were just as confused as I was. The engine had been destroyed, so this probably happened at sea, with no engine to propel them and no steering to guide them. They were dead in the water, so the currents probably brought the boat in. So what happened to the people? Also, on the bottom of the boat, we noticed there were scratch marks. We thought nothing of it, since we thought the boat probably hit a reef before it got on the beach. But some of them looked too deep and too straight, as if someone tried to carve it with a long, sharp knife. I was making a statement to one of the officers when I got called over by one of the Coast Guard guys. He sounded pretty upset.
Hey kid, you and that cop might want to take a look at this.
Me and the cop think nothing of it, so we walk on over to the boat where the Coast Guard guy was standing.
You guys see anything out of the ordinary?
We both scan the boat, and we don't see anything out of the ordinary. It looks like an empty boat, sir, I said, not really knowing what he was getting at.
Look closer,
he said. So we both lean in, and we see what he's talking about, and I don't believe it. There, Running to the edge of the boat were 4 scratch marks, and at the end of each one was a broken, bloody fingernail. I was bewildered. 4 bloody and broken fingernails. Somebody was dragged off the boat? I said.
Well, it looks like it,
said the Coast Guard guy. I looked straight at him. Why was he being so nonchalant about this? Wait, have you seen this before? He didn't even look at me.
We don't know what happened, but whatever happened is none of your concern. We're taking over.
I look around. My superiors give me this stare, as in to say, don't say anything. So I shut my mouth and head back to my car and went on with my day. I know not many people read them. I know not many people care. But it's still nice to find an outlet for what I saw. And I feel people have the right to know. They need to know. The arrogance of mankind is thinking that we know everything. We climb the tallest peaks, cure diseases, and even went as far as to put a man on the moon. If the first inhabitants of my island could see us now, they would surely see us as gods. Beings able to manipulate nature in ways to do our bidding in our search for knowledge. Many are bold enough to claim that there is nothing else to find here, and that our greatest discoveries lay beyond the stars of space. They forgot that there have been more men on the moon than in the Mariana. We know more about the moon than our own oceans. And I suggest they stop looking up and start looking at the sea. Fishing has been a staple for my people since the first inhabitants set foot here over 2,500 years ago. From the Kayquisio tribes to the Dutch settlers, the sea has provided food and resources, fish and salt, goods and commerce. The sea shaped us into who we are. Among the many fishermen on my island, nearly all live by the same code. The sea is as beautiful as she is mighty. To show respect is to come back from her embrace. To show dissidence is to be swallowed by the depths. I've heard stories of missing fishermen and the voices from the deep since I was no more than a little goat. As I grew, I merely chalked it up to just fishing stories and tragedies at sea. Now, I know there's something more to it. In the days following the incident of the migrant boat, we doubled our patrols, hoping to find any sign of the 7 people who were aboard before the craft mysteriously beached in a cove. Anything that we find was to be brought to the Coast Guard ASAP. We searched day and night, and the foot patrols on the beach turned up nothing. Aerial patrols saw nothing. Dives along the reefs turned up nothing but fish and the occasional plastic bottle. We searched every part of the coast, even went as far as hitting international waters. And still, no trace of the 7 people were ever found. The media labeled it as another tragedy of crisis happening to our neighbors to the south. People risking their lives in search for a better one. You want to know what pisses me off the most? The Venezuelan government labeled these people, these poor people, as traitors to the Republic. Any assistance from our neighbor was out of the question. After a month of searching and turning up nothing, the search was called off. The media eventually found some other tragedy to cover, and our tiny nation moved on like the currents. In the month during the search, I took my time to get up to speed of the goings-ons along the coast of the park. Apparently, it's not the first time something like this has happened. Sure, we get the occasional refugee boats, but the circumstances surrounding this beaching, it has happened many, many times before. People disappear and die all the time. I mean, this is a big park, and accidents happen. But these are different. They even have a name for it. Fish that drowned and are lost. Classy, guys. One story I remember was from Mr. S. Now, Mr. S is the personification of an ox. You know, the teacher's husband from Full Metal Alchemist? Well, he looks like that. He's been with the service for many since before I was even born. Needless to say, he's seen some weird shit. We were sheltering from a storm in base camp. The winds howled as the thunder rumbled angrily in the dark sky, and the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the distant sea. I was brewing the guys some coffee while we waited for the storm to pass. As I brought our mugs, he gestured for me to sit down. He told of a bold rescue of a capsizing boat about a kilometer offshore from the park. The seas were rough and unforgiving, and going by the boat would have been suicidal. "This weather reminds me of that day," he said somewhat jokingly. As part of the search and rescue division, he had a crew of 4 other men. They went out by helicopter. Upon arrival, they see only the keel of the craft with 5 people holding onto it for dear life. Mr. S readied himself as he lowered the rope to bring these people in one by one. As time passed, the further the boat sunk beneath the depths. The wind and rain made it difficult, but after what seemed like an eternity, they had 4 people aboard the helicopter. By the time the last person's turn had arrived, the boat was gone, and he was all alone in the water. Guy had his life vest on, so not only did he stay afloat, it was also still easy for me and the pilot to see. I get down to him, and the guy is besides himself, screaming and flailing like a madman. He said that there was something tugging on his shoes, he said laughingly while mimicking the man's screams. The rest of my colleagues laughed with him as I remained silent. "I've heard about this," I interrupted. Yeah, I was 13. You were the guy on the rope." He raised his hands up. "In the flesh. Now, where was I? Ah, right. So, the guy's freaking out about something touching his leg. At first, I thought it might have been debris from the boat that he was kicking into. Until I felt it too. I'ma tell you now, kid. I've done a lot of boat rescues in my day. Felt plenty of shit that said boats left behind. But whatever that was," he pointed to the ocean, obscured by the rain and darkness, "weren't no floaty. It felt like something was picking at my fins, as if testing the material or something. I told the guy to calm down while trying to also calm my own damn nerves. He held still long enough for me to get a harness on him. I gave the signal, and we started going up. When I was about 3 meters above the water, I looked down at the guy's face. Looked full of hope. His voice began to grow solemn. He started rising out of the water. His face went from hopeful to horrified. He was pulled under, and the rope got so tight that I thought whatever it was gonna pull the Hellion with me. It took a few seconds, but the rope slacked, and the empty harness was pulled out of the water. Searched for weeks, never found a trace of him. I remember, I said, trying to sound reassuring. Don't worry, nearly messed up a $10,000 harness though. The crew started laughing at this remark. They caught my silence. Don't worry, kid. You kind of get desensitized after a while. But I remember that day, I spouted. The news said a shark had gotten to him just before you pulled him in. Other than extreme bad luck, there's nothing weird about it. Mr. S began to laugh at my remark. A shark? Is that what they told them? His face grew serious. Look, kid, I know for a fact that ain't no shark that pulled that man under. What pulled him had gray, human arms.